Okay, you are now live.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Let me say first to members of the media, we will take questions after remarks, but in the meantime, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. We'll answer them at the conclusion of the remarks. So we're here today to celebrate the passage of a number of legislative reforms implementing recommendations of our COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force. And we want to acknowledge the hard work of our task force members and allies. When we launched the task force last June, we knew we had an ambitious but urgent charge. Even then, we saw how the pandemic had begun to expose and exacerbate the challenges that many Marylanders, and particularly low-income persons, people of color, and those with disabilities, faced in obtaining access to the civil justice system. You rose in the challenge, developing several dozen recommendations to protect against unnecessary evictions and foreclosures, to expand access to public benefits, to health insurance, to ensure safe workplaces and facilitate health and life planning, and more effectively fund civil legal service providers. And we included in our January report all of those recommendations. The report is called Confronting the COVID-19 Access to Justice Crisis. You can find it, if you haven't already, on our website. It's marylandattorneygeneral.gov. And although we formally concluded the task force's work when we issued the report, many of you continued to advance this important work by backing legislation that sought to implement the task force's recommendations. And I want to give special recognition to our committee co-chairs and to the members who oversaw those efforts, meeting weekly to coordinate testimony and discuss strategy under the leadership of our vice chair, Rena Shaw, and with the support of the Maryland State Bar Association and its Access to Justice Commission that is chaired by Ward Coe. Thank you all very much. We also owe a tremendous debt to our legislative members and partners. I know we've been joined by Delegate Sandy Bartley already this morning. We expect perhaps some additions to her ranks. And with their combined hard work, more than a dozen bills implementing the task force's recommendations passed. Vice Chair Judge Andre Davis will walk us through these successes shortly. And while there are far too many legislators to recognize every single one individually, I do want to highlight a few achievements. First has to do with civil legal aid funding. This was a very high priority for us. COVID-19 put an immeasurable burden on the civil legal aid system at the same time that funding for legal services plummeted. As a result, a key recommendation of the task force was to provide more sustainable funding for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. We want to thank Senator Guy Gazzoni. The MLSC will now receive $6 million in additional funding each year from the state's Abandoned Property Fund. Thank you, Senator, and thanks as well to your counterpart in the House of Delegates, the inimitable Maggie McIntosh. We were also able to achieve some improvement in health outcomes. The pandemic revealed race-based disparities in how healthcare is delivered. And thanks in large part to the efforts of Delegate Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, the General Assembly passed several bills to improve health outcomes and to reduce health inequities in Maryland, including one bill that will create a statewide oversight committee that is dedicated to improving our outcomes and looking at what the problems that remain and how we might best address them. In housing, which was another major focus of the task force, we noted that the pandemic exposed a crisis in affordable housing, particularly for low-income tenants of rental properties. While there was a measure of legislative success, substantially more work needs to be done to provide assistance and resources to tenants. In a very hard-fought battle, Senator Shelley Heddleman and Delegate Wanika Fisher ushered through legislation to expand tenants' access to legal counsel in eviction cases. That legislation also includes a requirement, and I think this is very significant, that landlords provide a 10-day written notice before filing an eviction complaint. And this was a proposal that was initially put forward by Delegate Melissa Wells. The state's unemployment benefit system was unprepared for the rapid escalation of claims and changing benefit structure, and it left newly unemployed Marylanders at increased risk of homelessness and hunger. Legislation introduced by Delegate Lori Charkoudian will require critical enhancements to the claims process, including establishing claims tracking capabilities and standards for timely processing. And essential workers who have been heroes over the past year gain benefits and workplace protections thanks to the good work of Delegate Derek Davis. So thanks to all of our state legislators for their hard work this session. We also received tremendous support from our federal partners and want to thank each one of our the members of our Congressional Advisory Committee who helped direct nearly $4 billion in state pandemic relief to the state for pandemic relief. And it includes hundreds of millions for rental assistance for families struggling to keep their homes. Even as we celebrate these successes, we have to acknowledge that there's work that remains to be done, particularly in the areas of housing and consumer protection, where legislation to increase the filing fee for eviction cases, which is among the lowest in the nation, and to eliminate body attachments for consumers who owe small debts, a bill that made it out of the House but stalled in the Senate. I want to thank Delegate Luke Clippinger and Senator Will Smith for their efforts to secure these critical reforms. We have not given up. We look forward to working with all of you over the interim to strategize on how we might get these and other important protections over the finish line next session. In addition to the legislative reforms, the task force issued numerous other recommendations for actions that could be taken by the governor, executive agencies, the judiciary, and the Maryland Bar to ensure meaningful access to justice. Later this morning, Vice Chair Rena Shaw will highlight some of the work she and others are doing via the Maryland Access to Justice Commission to advance those initiatives. Before we hear from her, I want to turn things over to a video of a man named Tim Howe, who can speak firsthand as to how people have been impacted by the pandemic, and in particular, the challenges of navigating the state's unemployment benefit system. Let's roll the video.
My name is Tim Howe, and I live in Crownsville, Maryland. I would like to begin by thanking Rena Shaw for asking me to share my story about the problems I had involving my benefits for unemployment insurance. I would also like to thank Cornita Bright Gordon, Director of Advocacy for Administrative Law for Maryland Legal Aid, and Daniel Chappell from the Maryland office for taking me as their client and representing my interests when dealing with the Department of Labor and the Office of Unemployment Insurance. I wouldn't have known what to do if I hadn't received their assistance and the help of Maryland Legal Aid. I spent much of my life working in news and media, and so I've worked to help people understand how policy affects the lives of the American people. But during this once-in-a-lifetime historic pandemic, I personally was at an absolute loss what to do when my job went away due to the COVID crisis. Like so many others, when problems arose receiving my benefits, I tried and could not get a response when I attempted to contact the Department of Labor and the Maryland Department of Unemployment Insurance. I filed on the first day of the emergency and began to receive my employment benefits. And then, without any notice or explanation, they just stopped. My benefits had been suspended. I had nothing coming in for months and months. After literally hundreds of phone calls, I finally got through to a contract employee hired by the state who was in New York City. She tried to help me by telling me she had heard the state was going to contact all the people whose benefits had been stopped for phone reviews, and that would take 8 to 10 weeks. But after 3 months, I still hadn't received any call from the state, and I haven't received any benefits. It was then that I called Maryland Legal Aid. I didn't have the money to hire a lawyer. I was getting quite worried about what to do and hoped they could and would help me. The people in Maryland Legal Aid stood up for me and were my voice. They spoke to the leadership in these state offices and got my benefits back for me. I worry about all the other workers in Maryland who lost their jobs and encountered the same problems with their benefits that I had and didn't have the benefit of legal counsel. There are many others in this state struggling to get their public benefits and don't know where to turn. They need your assistance now. Thank you very much.
Tim, that was very moving. I don't know whether
You're back on.
oh, I'm back on. It looked like I wasn't. Sorry. I'm glad that Legal Aid was able to help Tim. I don't know whether he's on the call, but we deeply appreciate your telling us that story, Tim. And I have to tell you that it mirrors complaints and pleas that my office got every day for the past 14 months. People in similar circumstances who could not get through to the Department of Labor. And ultimately, in the past few months, some of those who could and some of those who received unemployment insurance benefits began to call us in desperation because the department had notified them they were stopping the benefits and trying to claw back some of them for reasons that were not available to the recipients. And like the folks who were trying to get their benefits started, nobody could get through to the department to get an explanation or get an answer. So it continues to be deeply troubling. We hope that the legislation that has just been enacted will help the Department of Labor get itself back on its feet and resolve these critically important issues. So next, I'd like to invite Vice Chair Judge Andre Davis to walk us through the other successful task force bills during the session. Judge
Thank you.
Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us. And once again, thank you for the legions of advocates and task force members and committee members and legislators who worked so diligently to bring to fruition the successes that the task force interests reflected in the legislative session just ended. I'm going to start actually where Mr. Howell and the Attorney General left off with House Bill 1002, which addressed some of the problems that the Attorney General and Mr. Howell mentioned in his comments. My guess is that every one of us on this a Zoom meeting knows a family member or friend who was impacted by the breakdown in the unemployment process for our state. Unfortunately, my own daughter-in-law must have talked to every elected official and every appointed official in the state of Maryland. That's a slight exaggeration, as she made her way through the unemployment morass, and eventually it did work. So we're very, very pleased with all of the efforts that went into House Bill 1002, which was enacted as emergency legislation so that it is immediately in effect and has already begun indeed, to lift some of the burdens on people who are facing the myriad problems that resulted from the Department of Labor's being overwhelmed by a lack of the appropriate technology and the lack of personnel and the lack of know-how in the beginning to address this serious human need. As the Attorney General mentioned, success in Annapolis is always a mixed bag, and we are pleased with what we were able to achieve in terms of the task force's aspirations. And there were a number of great successes, not least among them, of course, is the limited right to counsel, which has now been afforded to those involved in eviction cases. Maryland Legal Services Corporation is placed at the center of ensuring that funding and the provision of counsel to persons involved in eviction cases becomes a reality. It was so important, as the Attorney General mentioned, as the task force recommendations urgently sought that a 10-day notice requirement be injected into the eviction legal proceedings so that tenants are given a real chance to avoid the indignity of having to go to court when the real problem in so many cases is simply economic circumstances which make that necessary. So we're very, very pleased and proud of the work that was done by all stakeholders to bring that bill to light. Other matters in the housing recommendations did not achieve what we had hoped. And in particular, we're very disappointed, of course, and the Attorney General has a particular interest, I think, continuing to see if we can't persuade members of the legislature to increase the filing fees that are imposed on landlords, many landlords, not all, to increase the funds available, to enhance fairness in the eviction cases, and to limit the extraordinary number of eviction cases that are filed in Maryland, far and above those that really need to be filed and should be filed. So I expect that particular matter will return in years to come, and we're not going to give up on that. Maryland needs to be aligned in terms of the filing fee in such cases with the neighboring states and the states all over the country, really. Limited success was achieved, unfortunately, in the area of consumer protection. We especially are disappointed with the failure of the bill designed to eliminate body attachments, which is another word for arrest warrants, for those involved in the collection of judgments in small claims cases. The support for that bill was absolutely overwhelming. Everybody stepped up in favor of the bill, except the judiciary and perhaps one or two others. Now, look, I'm going to say it, we have the best judiciary in the country, bar none, hands down. We're all rightly proud of our judiciary, from the top all the way down to the District of Maryland. But I have to say, sometimes the judiciary takes a position to ensure that it's properly operated. And some of us think believe it misses the real nugget in a piece of legislation. And frankly, this was one of them. The judiciary argued, understandably, that a court order that is not backed up by the threat of arrest probably shouldn't be issued at all. And we agree. That was the underlying point. Perhaps we could have made it better. That was the underlying point of the legislation. The criminalization of inconveniences to people in power is a problem in this country. We see it, and we've seen it recently with traffic stops for misdemeanor warrants and that kind of thing. And so we'll be back. I think the advocates will be back for sure to the legislature to ask for further consideration and with the judiciary to carve out a singular exception, if you will, to the use of body attachments in small claims cases, because those folks shouldn't be arrested on the basis of a failure to show up in court. And as we've argued, the debt collectors in America have enormous resources and capacity to find resources possessed or owned by small judgment debtors, and to use legal process short of an actual attachment or an arrest in order to satisfy their judgments, which, by the way, in Maryland, earn interest at 10% a year. It's the greatest investment anyone can have these days. So we'll be back on that. As the Attorney General mentioned, in the area of both health and unemployment, it was a big get, and we are very grateful to the enormous expansion of access to healthcare, the enormous increase in data collection, which one of the bills will require so that we can actually walk the walk of healthcare equity, not just talk the talk. We're very pleased with the legislature's continuation of the remote witnessing and remote notarization process, which the governor had put in place early in the pandemic. And so these steps will really help the disabled, the infirm, the marginalized, together with the transfer of tax credits, real property tax credits in the context of inheritance. These are real, meaningful, impactful changes to Maryland law that the task force members and committee members spent a great deal of time focused on and working on. And then finally, of course, it appears that we're going to say our fond farewell, sort of, to Susan Ehrlichman, the longtime executive director of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Thank you, Susan, so much for your incredible work over the years, over more than a decades. And this legacy of work that we see come to fruition in this legislative session, I think is an appropriate testament to your devotion to the underrepresented, the unrepresented, and the marginalized folks in our community. So we have a lot to be pleased about. We have more work to do, and we're hopeful that the governor, as we expect, will see fit to sign these bills. So far, he's signed only a few, and we expect to see improvements in the lives of many Marylanders as a result of the task force work and the supporters on whom we relied to get this work done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Davis. We were extraordinarily lucky to have someone with your background, talent, expertise, and SWAT to work with the task force. We deeply appreciate it. And I want to echo the remarks that you made about Susan Ehrlichman. Susan, we're going to miss you if you really go through with this retirement. And thank you so much for everything you've done for legal services in our state for many years, and especially for your vital support this past session for advancing the cause of representation of low-income individuals. I also want to recognize that we have a representative of Senator Chris Van Hollen here. Tricia, thanks so much for joining us. And of course, we have with us Judge Mark Skirty, who is not only a member of the task force, but also president of the Maryland Bar Association. Thanks for being with us this morning, Your Honor. Now let me turn things over to Rena Shaw to discuss the next steps and continuing initiatives that stem from the task force's work. Rena.
Great. Thank you so much, Attorney General Frosch. Thank you to Judge Davis for those remarks. And I echo what everyone has said about Susan Ehrlichman as well. And so, you know, the fight continues. What we came up with in the task force, what should be clear is that civil justice issues are very broad, and they affect a lot of people's lives in a lot of different ways. You see administrative actions. You were hearing about public benefits and the unemployment system, food benefits. You know, if you're trying to get Medicaid, you can be in the federal system with immigration issues, with bankruptcy issues, and other issues, and you can be in state courts, you know, with evictions or debt collection. So where you find the civil justice system is very broad, and that's why the recommendations that came from our final report, the 60-odd recommendations, were quite broad-ranging. Of course, the work is not done with the task force, and as was previously mentioned, many of the recommendations were directed towards the legislature. However, there were many that were, you know, the work needs to continue because they're directed elsewhere. And so a lot of that work will continue in the Access to Justice Commission. The Maryland Access to Justice Commission existed prior to the task force, and, you know, the task force work really helped elevate these issues, bring them to the fore. I cannot thank Attorney General Frosch enough for taking on these challenges, for bringing them to light, for really making them and placing them sort of on par with many of the other issues that we faced during the pandemic, but bringing and shining a light to so many of these issues that have been kind of hidden and not right out in the open, and saying that it's important. It's important to have legal representation. It's important that people get fairness in the justice system. It's important that people understand what their rights are. It's important to have law reform so that we can make the laws themselves fairer, so that the most vulnerable, as we saw, you know, were disproportionately impacted by COVID, by the health crisis, by the economic crisis. And what we tried to avert and really confront head on was that they wouldn't be by the civil justice crisis. So while we've made gains, as has been said, there is a lot of work that remains. And so I'm going to just share my screen briefly and show you some of the work that will be happening. Let me see if I can do this, Bill. I hope I can. Share screen. Can you all see the?
We cannot, you might have to click OK or done after you select the PowerPoint.
Okay. Well, perhaps this may not work. I did it earlier.
So you click share screen, select the PowerPoint, and then there should be a done or OK after that. I think it's a share, the share button. It's the blue share button. And that'll start the share for us.
Okay. Unfortunately, the option is not coming to me to share my screen. Oh, there it is. Now it came. My apologies for that. All right, here we go. So what the work that will continue in the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, the key recommendation for us, because this aligns very well with the work that we are already doing, is to ensure that Marylanders have meaningful access to the civil justice system. And that includes three different things. Increasing access to legal assistance. So you have heard a lot about increasing the funding for legal services, which we will continue to do. As was mentioned earlier, the access to counsel in evictions was passed, and we are very encouraged by that. That is a huge step for the state. However, there's no funding mechanism attached to that. So in order for that to really be effective and to help people and to prevent evictions, we will be pursuing funding sources and helping with that entire effort. And it's not just going to be us, it's an entire community that will be working towards that. There is also an effort with the private bar to make sure that we are tapping into sort of the resources of the private bar, you know, and making a call to action related to pro bono. Obviously, this is one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece. And, you know, attorneys in Maryland do step up, but there's more that we can do. And if there are barriers to certain types of attorneys being able to do pro bono, we want to work on eradicating those barriers. And we want to make sure that everyone understands the stakes and can take part in helping those as the demand is poised to just increase exponentially. The other part is enhancing access to critical information. What we found through the task force work is that there were a lot of people who did not know where to go to get the information they needed to either be connected to the civil justice system, or you would have a lot of information about social services without the recognition that there's a legal component to that problem, and those people will need a legal help to solve that problem. And finally, there's work related to enhancing access to civil justice data, because the lack of civil justice data itself is a barrier to justice. You cannot make, as you heard Judge Davis talk about health data, you cannot make strides, you cannot make progress if you cannot measure something. If you don't even know what the baseline is, how are you going to improve from there? So we have a deep commitment to ensuring that we are data informed in our policy decisions. A lot of this information can be found on our website, mdaccesstojustice.org. I did want to also inform folks, while a lot of this work was happening in the legislature, there were other things that members of the task force and their committees were continuing to work on. So one is this website that was created. It's a microsite. It's called www.debtcollectionmaryland.org. And this is what the Consumer Protection Committee worked deeply on. All the resources related to consumer debt can be found in this one place. And it's an entire microsite that lays out in plain language any information related to consumer debt issues that consumers may be facing in Maryland. So that will be a very helpful resource. Another thing that is upcoming that we are poised to release soon is a life and health planning handbook that was created by our Life and Health Planning Committee. And this is going to be both in a digital version and in a printed version. And it will be very helpful for as people are facing life and health planning decisions. And we plan to share it broadly, with hospitals and with other, providers where people intersect with the healthcare system, but also may have legal issues that they're dealing with. Finally, we will be working on a partnership with 211. We were very pleased and honored to have 211 involved in the task force. And while they were doing a little bit around legal information and a legal reference, we really want to bolster the capacity of 211 as they're a known entity that people can call to figure out where they can get help. We really need to integrate that, the civil legal component of that into 211. We're very pleased that they're open to this partnership, and they're open to incorporating this into the work that they do. So we look forward to that, because as cases go up, people will need to know where they can call in an easy place. And so this partnership with 211, and hopefully with many other partners, including the judiciary, will really be beneficial to people, Marylanders, who are looking for help within the civil justice system. Finally, I want to highlight a new tool that the Maryland Access to Justice Commission created, in conjunction with the task force. We did have an entire committee on the task force that was related to data and legal technology. And as I mentioned, having data and having information in one place is critical. So this tool is both a communications tool and a data tool. It has interactive maps, and it really lays out for anyone that has questions about what are we talking about when we talk about the civil justice system? Who is involved in it? What are the many types of cases that are involved? You can see that we've tried to put it all together in one place so that it's a compelling presentation. People can really understand the stakes. So you can see from this slide that almost 40% of Maryland households do not have enough money to afford basic human necessities, let alone an attorney. And we do know how important attorneys can be, as you heard from Mr. Howe, in even navigating these processes to make sure people can, have their check, have food, etc. This is the portion of the tool that is very new. It has never been done before. It's the first of its kind. And what it allows you to do is choose different indicators that you might be interested in, for example, evictions or protective order or small claims. And the map will change in accordance with what you choose, and you will get county-specific data that will be comparable across counties. And we have included statewide data as well, so that now we can start understanding what the baseline is and start understanding, as is clear through the map that I'm showing you now, that when we talk about civil justice issues, we're not talking about urban issues or rural issues. You can see hotspots across the country, across the state, where people are facing these issues, and they're a reality. We have put in trends in here so that we can start comparing what happened in 2019 versus what we are seeing in terms of cases in 2020. And some with administrative law issues, you can see things are already spiking, and with others, we can see that the spike is yet to come. And we have provided side-by-side comparisons of many different cases that we hope to track in the future and gives good information. And finally, we want to highlight the fact that because a lot of things in the civil justice system went remote, that there is a huge digital divide. It does not just apply to education, but it applies to justice. And so a lot of people will still struggle to interact with the civil justice system in this way. There are pros, there are cons, there are benefits to being able to do justice remotely, but we always have to keep in mind the folks that may not be able to access that system. So those are some of the things that have been happening, that will continue to happen in the Access to Justice Commission. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Did I stop sharing my screen, Bill?
Yes, you did.
Okay, excellent. And so, what I want to end with is just thanking the members of the task force, thanking the legislators, and everyone that was involved in this effort. Our goal together, working collectively, is that when people encounter the civil justice system, justice should be accessible, it should be equitable, and it should be fair. And that's really what we're working through with all of you as partners. So it's been an honor and a privilege, and I thank everybody, and the work continues in the commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rena. And I just want to say to the rest of the folks on this video that Rena not only made numerous substantive contributions to the work of the task force, she was also the glue or the ringmaster, depending on your perspective. She kept things together. She kept it organized. She lined up experts and organized the testimony on the numerous bills that were introduced. So we're very grateful to you, Rena, for the great job that you did. And before we finish and take questions, let me just ask Delegate Bartlett, did you want to say a word?
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I just wanted to say, we pushed everything to the last minute on Sine Die. And there were some things that I thought we were going to be able to pass, and unfortunately the clock ran out on us. But overall, I appreciate the great work of the task force, and thank you so much for just all the coordination and leadership. Rena, you kept me informed and made sure that anything I could do to help during session, and I appreciate that. And Mr. Attorney General, we appreciate you coming down figuratively and testifying when you did. Judge Davis, we appreciate you and your remarks and your steadfastness. So thank you, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you for your contribution. Really appreciate it. So look, COVID-19 positivity rates are going back up, and the pandemic's threat to our financial and economic health is far from over. We've identified and achieved a number of critical reforms, but it's very clear we're not done. And so I encourage everyone who's on the call or watching or listens to it later, continue to work with us. Work with us through the Access to Justice Commission and the Maryland State Bar Association to ensure that all Marylanders have access to justice. With that, are there any questions? Do we have anything?
I have a question, Attorney General.
Yes.
It's Franklin Baker. I just wanted to echo everyone.
Hey, Franklin.
Thank you so much for your work, your leadership. Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Zanita, Judge Davis, and the entire cast of probably hundreds, right, who were in some ways connected to this work, right, and all the co-chairs of the various committees. I just wanted to ask a question to Judge Davis, or maybe it's Rena. I know we had a full court press with the 60 some odd recommendations, and we did a really yeoman's job to try to push and work with Sandy and so many others to push a lot of these through. I was just a bit concerned about the filing fee legislation. It seemed like it was so obvious. It seemed like it was just the most obvious thing to do, right? On so many levels. And I was curious, from your lens, was it primarily sort of the moxie of the lobbyists from the landlord's perspectives? Was it, on the judicial side? What was the driver in terms of why it didn't get pushed through? I was just so curious about that, because it seemed like every person you talked to, it was a no-brainer, right? Any thoughts, reflections on that would be helpful, I think, just to hear.
I'm going to defer to the Attorney General, except to say that it's going to pass next year. I'll go out on a limb.
Franklin, first of all, thank you for your great work. We really appreciated your participation and contributions. And I mean, the answer to the question is clearly that landlords overwhelmed the members of the General Assembly with calls. And this was a year when nobody could be there in person, but or be down in Annapolis in person. But I know that they were besieged by landlords saying this isn't fair. One of the arguments they made is, why should we pay for their attorneys, which I thought was particularly disingenuous. But the fact is that we have an extraordinarily serious problem. We have serial evictions unlike any other state. We have 92 eviction filings for every 100 units throughout the state. And that's compared to a national average of around 7 or 8 filings per 100 units. All over the rest of the country, in our neighborhood, it's slightly higher than that. It's 12 to 15%, but compare that to 92%, and it's obvious that we have a very serious problem in Maryland. And of course, every time there's a filing, it piles costs on to each tenant. And we know that there are many landlords that file on the 6th day of the month if the rent is late. The good thing about the legislation that was passed, it was originally introduced by Delegate Melissa Wells and ultimately incorporated in the bill of Shelley Heddleman and Winika Fisher, is that when the tenant gets notice that if you don't pay the rent, in 10 days I'm filing suit, gives the tenant important notice that they can seek legal services, and notice that the rent is overdue. Sometimes, they forget, but usually it's because they're scrambling to put together the money and they don't realize the landlord is going to be in court tomorrow if it isn't paid. And giving them that 10-day notice, we think, will help significantly. We still have to fight to get the fee raised and to prohibit it being passed on to tenants. I think that's fair and appropriate, especially given the disparate treatment that tenants get in Maryland. Any other questions, comments, criticism, insults? Well, all right. Thank you very much to everybody who participated in any way with the task force, and the folks who are on this Zoom call. You especially were extraordinarily helpful. We appreciate everything that everybody has done. And as we've said several times, there's a lot left to do. So stay engaged, and thank you very, very much. Bill, are we